Adrian Cole used to be the kind of name that made people sit up a little straighter. At 33, he had built LumaVest systems from nothing but a second-hand laptop, a rented desk, and an idea the banks had called naive. 10 years later, that same idea, an intelligent platform for reimagining how ordinary people invested, had put him on magazine covers and conference stages. Calm, measured, and relentlessly ethical in an industry that did not always reward that, he'd been labeled everything from prodigy to pioneer. And now he was the man who had lost everything. One deal, that was all it had taken. One massive, carefully structured investment that was supposed to secure LumaVest's future for a decade. One partner he had trusted like family who pulled out at the last possible moment, leaving Adrian's name standing alone on the agreements. The markets did what they always did when fear was louder than facts. They panicked. Stocks plunged, strategic partners vanished, clients pulled out, and LumaVest's value shrank by more than 2/3 before he'd even finished his morning coffee. The headlines came fast and vicious, each more dramatic than the last. The fall of the market wizard. From billionaire to burden. Adrian stopped reading after the third one. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. Executives argued until their voices were hoarse, each one eager to prove they had a solution or, at the very least, someone else to blame. People he had mentored, people whose careers existed because he had once believed in them, began to suggest, politely, carefully, that perhaps stepping down might be best for the company. He sat through it all with his jaw locked, knuckles white under the table, saying almost nothing. When the meeting finally staggered to an end near midnight, he rose without a word and walked out. No handshakes, no forced nods, no goodbyes. The hallways of LumaVest were nearly dark, lit only by soft bands of emergency light. The building, which once hummed with energy and overlapping voices, felt like an abandoned theater after the final curtain. Chairs empty, lights dim, echoes fading. He moved slowly down the corridor, a slim folder of documents dangling from his hand. As he walked, loose pages slipped free and drifted to the floor like tired snow. He didn't notice. His mind was nowhere near the corridor. It was trapped in a loop of numbers and names, of margins and missed calls, of betrayal and the quiet terror of not knowing how to fix a life that had always, until now, obeyed his will. He reached the elevator, thumbed the call button, and watched the light glow up with a weary detachment. Behind him, a gentle voice broke the silence. Adrian turned as if waking from a dream. A young woman stood a few steps away, wearing a navy cleaning uniform with a small stitched name tag he couldn't quite read from here. Her dark hair, shot through with a few strands of early gray that did not match her youthful face, was pulled back into a simple ponytail, a few wisps softening the edges of her features. In her hand, held as carefully as if it were a photograph, was a single white page. "Sir, you dropped this one." She walked closer and offered it with both hands. "I found it outside the boardroom," she said softly. Adrian glanced at this page. He recognized the header, but not the specifics. One of a dozen internal memos, half-formed ideas and technical drafts. Maybe an early algorithm outline, maybe something already obsolete. In the avalanche of what he'd lost, this page was a grain of sand. "It doesn't matter," he said, his voice rough from hours of forced composure. "You can throw it away." She hesitated. Her eyes moved from the paper to his face, reading more than his words. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he replied too quickly, as if the finality might keep something inside him from cracking. "It's just trash now." She didn't argue. He turned back to the elevator as the doors slid open with a soft chime. He stepped inside, the folder still in his hand, shoulders bowed under an unseen weight. The doors closed, sealing him in polished metal and his own thoughts. Down the hall, the janitor, Nora Hart, though he still didn't know her name, remained where she stood, the paper resting in her fingers. Only when the elevator light blinked away did she carefully fold the page in half and tuck it into the spiral notebook lying in the side pocket of her cleaning cart. She wasn't entirely sure why. Only that something in her, some quiet instinct built from years of watching people drop things they didn't realize they needed, whispered that this page deserved a second chance. The building was almost asleep, computers dark, windows reflecting only the emptiness inside. But on that forgotten page, inside a tired man's discarded idea, Something small and stubborn had just refused to be thrown away. That night, in a small apartment across the river, the city finally went quiet long before Nora did. She sat on the edge of a narrow thrift store bed, springs creaking when she shifted her weight. A faded lamp on the crate she used as a nightstand cast a weak circle of light over peeling wallpaper and a single framed photo of an older woman smiling into the camera. The smell of instant noodles still lingered in the air, mixed with the faint citrus of the cleaning supplies she'd carried home on her clothes. She hadn't even taken off both shoes before reaching into her cart bag and pulling out the folded paper. She smoothed it across the wobbly table that served as both her desk and dining area, pressing the creases with the side of her hand. It was an internal memo, one page, unfinished. Lines of dense language and symbols stretched across it. Terms most people would skim over if they read it at all. But Nora didn't skim. She read slowly, moving her lips soundlessly with each sentence, as if sounding the words out helped her see beneath them. It was the outline of a machine learning model designed to track shifting market behavior in real time. Not just respond, but predict, adjusting as people reacted, trying to read the mood behind the numbers. Experimental. Ambitious, a little messy. The kind of idea that lived, at least for a while, half in the world and half in possibility. She read it once, then again. On the third read, her brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in recognition. She was months away from finishing her own online certification in data analytics, carving out study time between night shifts and early morning grocery runs. Her textbooks were dog-eared and out of date, but they had taught her enough to see patterns. Enough to notice when something almost worked. This almost worked. There were missing pieces. Variables introduced and then abandoned mid-sentence. Assumptions left untested. A feedback loop that seemed to double count certain signals. But beneath the roughness, there was a spine of logic. A structure that made sense in a way that stirred something in her. Like hearing an unfinished melody that your mind couldn't help but hum to completion. She reached for a pencil, the same one she used to mark up coupons and grocery lists, and began to circle sections of the memo. Here, the sentiment input was too broad. There, a weighting function that seemed off. She wrote small, careful notes in the margin, mindful of the neat, angular handwriting that had originally filled the page. By 2 a.m, her eyes burned, but her mind was strangely calm. She had read the page 5 times, fixed and refixed the same lines in her head, scribbled 4 key flaws she could see, and 3 possible ways to strengthen the logic. The work wasn't polished. She knew that. There were things she didn't fully grasp yet, pieces that hovered just out of reach, waiting on lessons she hadn't taken and lectures she hadn't heard. Still, she kept going. Outside the thin window, the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that can feel heavy if you let it. For a long time, Nora had moved through that kind of silence as if she were invisible. Cleaning office kitchens while executives argued behind glass, wiping down desks that held problems no one thought she could understand. But tonight, with that one page in front of her, she didn't feel invisible. She felt involved. As if she'd stumbled across a broken watch and, instead of throwing it away, had decided to see if, with a little patience, it might tick again. She sat back at last, rubbing the inside of her wrist, where a faint ache had crept in. The page lay on the table, now full of soft pencil marks. She knew he had called it trash, said it meant nothing, but people said all kinds of things when they were hurting, when they were afraid they had reached the end of the road. Maybe that was why she cared. Because this page wasn't yet ruined beyond repair. Because something about the careful lines and hurried corrections told her it had been written by someone who, at least once in his life, believed in building things that helped others. Someone who had just watched his world come apart in one brutal day. Nora turned off the lamp and lay down without bothering to pull back the thin blanket. In the dark, the apartment hummed with the quiet sounds of old pipes and distant traffic. The folded memo rested on the table, the promise of unfinished thoughts still holding its place in the shadows. Before sleep finally came, one thought settled gently in her chest. Maybe not everything was over yet. Not for the man who had tossed the paper away, and not for her. 3 days later, the city sky hung low and gray, the kind of color that made time feel slower than it really was. Inside Lumavest, the fluorescent lights hummed steadily, indifferent to headlines and human crises. Nora had just finished mopping the polished hallway near the executive lounge, her cart tucked neatly against the wall, when she heard footsteps echo from the elevator. Adrian Cole stepped out. He looked marginally better than the last time she had seen him, less like a man wandering through the wreckage of his own life, more like someone who had found a wall to lean on. Still, the exhaustion sat in the pale stretch of skin beneath his eyes, in the way he held his shoulders as though they had learned to carry more than they were built for. Nora's heart began to pound. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind at least a dozen times while scrubbing break room sinks and emptying trash cans. Each version ended with her losing her nerve, but the folder in her hands felt heavier than paper. It felt like a quiet promise she'd made to herself. If there was a chance to try, she would take it. She wiped her palms on the side of her uniform, drew a breath that trembled only slightly, and stepped into his path. "Mr. Cole," she said. He looked up, as if pulled from far away. It took him a second to recognize her, the janitor from the other night, with that same calm gaze and the same navy uniform. She held out a single sheet at first, then after a brief hesitation, placed the thin folder between them. "I didn't throw it away," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I hope that's all right. I know you said it didn't matter, but I think this paper has value." Adrian accepted the folder, curiosity flickering beneath the tiredness in his eyes. He opened it, brows knitting slightly as he scanned the pages. The memo he had written, something he barely remembered drafting in the middle of a sleepless week, looked different now. Clean, flattened, and covered in delicate penciled notes. Little circles around variables. Arrows connecting sections. Comments written in small, precise handwriting along the margins. He read one of her corrections more closely, his jaw tightening, then another. The elevator behind him chimed, but he didn't move. "You understood this?" he asked at last. "Not all of it," Nora admitted, "but enough to follow what it's trying to do. I'm studying data analytics online. I work here at night." He went quiet, reading more of her notes. For the last few weeks, he'd been surrounded by polished presentations, consultants with perfect diction and expensive suits, all telling him what could no longer be done. This, in his hands now, was the opposite. Rough, honest, an effort made in pencil at a kitchen table. "That algorithm is probably dead," he said finally, though his tone carried more weariness than certainty. Like everything else in this place, Nora did not look away. "If people gave up that easily," she said quietly, "we wouldn't have electricity or airplanes or the kind of software that got you on those magazine covers." The words weren't sharp. They were gentle, almost apologetic, but they landed with an unexpected weight. For a moment, they simply stood there, two people from opposite ends of the building, of the pay scale, of the story people told about success. Adrian studied her face. There was no angle there, no pitch. She wasn't trying to sell him a solution or impress him into noticing her. She had found something everyone else overlooked, and instead of stepping over it, she had knelt down and tried to mend it. After a long, quiet breath, he said, "If you want to keep a copy, go ahead." Nora's lips curved in the smallest of smiles, relief loosening something tight in her chest. "Thank you," she murmured. He handed the folder back. The elevator doors opened behind him with another soft chime. He stepped inside. Just before the doors slid shut, he turned his head, almost as if against his will, and looked back at her. Only for a heartbeat. In that brief, fragile moment, something shifted, barely perceptible but real. A sliver of weight lifting from his eyes, a hint of belief returning where there had only been defeat. And down the hallway, alone with her cleaning cart and a marked-up page of equations, Nora held the folder like it was something more than numbers and ink. She still didn't know what would come of any of it. But somewhere deep inside, the quiet part of her that had learned to hope in small, careful ways whispered that this might not be the end of the story after all. Late afternoon bled into early evening, and Lumavest's glass lobby reflected a city that seemed to move on without waiting for anyone to catch up. The revolving doors hissed softly as people came and went, eyes on their phones, lives intact. Adrian moved through the space with his head bowed, one hand buried deep in the pocket of his coat, the other still clutching his phone from a call that had ended on a flat, familiar note. Another investor had regretfully decided to step back. Another person who had once praised his vision now questioned his judgment. The words blurred together after a while. Liability, risk, restructuring. It was astonishing how quickly language could turn on you. "Mr. Cole," the voice reached him before he reached the exit. He turned. Nora stood near the security desk, still in her Navy uniform, the zipper slightly crooked where she'd tugged it up too quickly. Her dark ponytail had loosened over the long shift, soft strands framing her face. She looked nervous, fingers tightening around the thin folder she held, but she did not look unsure. "I hope this isn't out of place," she began, taking a few steps toward him. "But I kept thinking about that memo." Adrian's brows lifted, just a fraction. "The algorithm draft?" he asked. She nodded and extended the folder, the motion careful, like she was placing something fragile on a table. "I ran some rough simulations," she said, "and I wrote down a few ideas. I know it's not perfect, but I think there's something here." Curiosity, faint but genuine, flickered through his fatigue. He opened the folder in the middle of the lobby, noise and motion fading around them. Page after page met his eyes. Equations, revised loops, hand-drawn data flows. Nothing about it was polished. No printed slides, no corporate logos, no buzzwords. It was just effort, laid out in pencil and cheap ink. Midway through the second page, he stopped. A correction in the margin caught his attention. The weighting function he had been uncertain about, adjusted in a way that made his pulse pick up a notch. "What's this?" he asked, tapping the note. Nora stepped closer, looking at the spot he indicated. "It's a change in the weighting function," she said quietly. "I think the original underestimated real-time sentiment. If we increase the feedback loop here just a little," she pointed to a variable, "we might reduce the volatility lag you were seeing." Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. She stood there in her worn work shoes, talking calmly about volatility and sentiment distortion as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's just a theory," she added quickly. "I know I clean floors, but I study data analytics at night, online." Adrian didn't answer right away. He looked back down at the pages she'd filled. In recent years, he'd read proposals from people with immaculate resumes, degrees stamped with prestige, projects funded by more money than he'd had in his entire childhood. Those documents had been polished, structured, rehearsed. This was different. It was raw, but the thinking was sharp, clean. Someone had stayed up late, not because they were paid to, but because they couldn't quite let go of the problem. "You did all this yourself?" he asked quietly. Nora nodded, hesitating. "They're just ideas," she said. "I don't expect anything. I just thought maybe it could help." For the first time in days, something in Adrian's chest eased, like a too-tight knot loosening a single loop. He closed the folder carefully. "Come with me," he said. She blinked, startled. I still have 20 minutes left on my shift." His mouth twitched, almost into a smile. Almost. "I'll talk to your supervisor," he replied. "This won't take long." As they walked toward the elevator together, the hum of the lobby receded behind them. Nora's heart thudded against her ribs, half in fear, half in something that felt dangerously like hope. The elevator doors closed, carrying them upward, not just between floors, but toward something neither of them could yet name. The elevator climbed in a hush, cables humming behind the walls, the floor numbers ticking upward in a slow, patient rhythm. Nora stood a step behind Adrian, hands clasped around the folder as if it were the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. She watched his reflection in the brushed metal door, calm on the surface, eyes distant, as if he were listening for a sound no one else could hear. On the executive floor, the hallway was nearly empty. Most of the offices were dark, doors closed, lights off. The storm that had swept through the company in recent weeks had left its own kind of debris. Vacant desks, unanswered emails, future plans shelved quietly. Adrian walked with practiced familiarity, stopping at a glass door with his name etched discreetly in one corner. He held it open for her. "Come in," he said. She hesitated only a second before stepping into the office. It wasn't as grand as she'd imagined. Less like a throne room, more like a space someone actually used. A wide glass desk faced the window, its surface scattered with notebooks, a coffee mug, and a tangle of cables. Shelves lined one wall, filled not with trophies but with books, some old and worn, their spines faded from being handled too often. Adrian walked straight to the desk and spread the pages from her folder out across the glass, smoothing them with the flat of his hand. Nora stayed near the door at first, uncertain where she belonged in a room like this. Her cart, her mop, her world of cleaning supplies felt a lifetime away, though in truth they were just one elevator ride below. Silence settled, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind Nora had seen in meetings when people were trying not to say what they really thought. This silence was focused. Adrian bent over the pages, reading more slowly now, tracing her annotations, pausing over each suggestion as if weighing it in his mind. Minutes passed. The hum of the heating system filled the room with a gentle, constant sound. Nora shifted her weight from one foot to the other, fingers worrying the edge of her sleeve. A small part of her wondered if she'd gone too far, if keeping the memo and making notes had crossed some invisible line. Another part, a quiet, stubborn part, refused to regret it. Finally, he looked up. "You know," he said, his voice softer than it had been downstairs, "if this works, even partially, it could change everything." She blinked. "Do you really think so?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He nodded, gaze drifting back to the paper. "The core structure was mine," he admitted. "But your suggestions, they fixed the blind spots we left open. Maybe the ones I left open." He said it without drama, almost clinically, but Nora heard the weight underneath. The admission that he too could overlook something important, that he too was capable of missing what mattered. She drew a cautious breath. "I only followed the logic," she said. "Sometimes it's easier to see the gaps when you haven't been staring at them for months." Adrian leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. For a moment, he seemed to be considering something far beyond the room's walls. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Would you help me test it?" Nora froze where she stood. "Me?" she asked, as if there might be someone else he was talking to. "Not officially," he added quickly. "Not yet. No job titles, no announcements. Just you and me seeing if this thing still has a pulse. If it does, maybe we show it to the right people. If it doesn't..." He let the sentence trail off. They both knew there were worse things than failing quietly in a forgotten office. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath with her. She thought of her grandmother's hands, rough from years at a sewing machine, teaching her to fix zippers and seams because if you can mend one thing, you can mend 10. She thought of all the nights she had walked these halls unseen, cleaning up after other people's work. "Yes," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll help." Adrian looked up fully then, and something subtle shifted in his expression. It wasn't a smile, not exactly. It was something softer, more fragile, like the first light edging into a long, dark sky. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that quiet office, beneath the weight of a company on the brink, a fallen founder and a night janitor had just agreed to do something neither had words for. Not just salvage a broken model, but offer each other the smallest, bravest thing they had left. A second chance. The room they chose for their work wasn't on any official floor plan. It was a forgotten conference room at the end of a side corridor with no nameplate on the door and a faint stain on the carpet where someone had once dropped coffee and never really cleaned it up. The overhead light flickered when you first turned it on, like it had to clear its throat before speaking. Adrian opened the door and gestured inside. "Welcome to our very glamorous research lab," he said dryly. Inside, an older man looked up from a laptop. His salt and pepper hair was pulled into a short, no-nonsense ponytail, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. Nora recognized him from a distance. Eli Navarro, one of the first engineers hired when Luma Vest was still renting half a floor and everyone wore 3 job titles at once. People said he had stuck around through every pivot, every rebrand, every good year and bad one. Eli studied Nora for a beat, then glanced at the folder in Adrian's hand. No introduction was needed. The triangle formed silently. The founder fighting not to lose the last 10 years of his life. The engineer tired of watching decisions he didn't make unravel his work. And the janitor whose late-night notes had pulled an old idea back from the edge. "Project Backline," Adrian said suddenly, setting the folder on the table. Nora tilted her head. "Backline?" He shrugged. "It's the support behind the performance. The part no one sees that keeps everything from collapsing. That's what this is. We either build a quiet line of support behind this mess, or we stand in the spotlight and watch it fall." Eli gave a short nod, approval without fanfare. Nora just held on to the words, letting them settle in the space between them. Over the next weeks, Time blurred into a series of late nights and early mornings. The forgotten room became their world. Monitors cast pale light across their faces. Code scrolled in quiet streams. Market data pulsed in colored charts. Outside, the company worried about press releases, restructuring plans, and rumors. Inside, they worried about something narrower but no less important. Could this fragile model actually work? Eli rebuilt old data pipelines with the steady patience of someone who'd done it too many times. Adrian refined assumptions, adjusting for behaviors he'd seen over years of watching markets panic. Nora sat between them, notebook open, eyes moving between screens and equations. She penciled in logic adjustments, circled anomalies, and cross-checked sentiment graphs with a focus that didn't waver, even when she yawned. One night, with the clock edging past 2, Nora leaned in toward one of the dashboards, squinting at a cluster of numbers. Something in the pattern nagged at her, the way a slightly off rhythm can make your foot stutter in mid-step. "Wait," she murmured. "Something's wrong here." Both men turned. She pointed to a segment of data. "Here, the third-party feed. Look at the IDs. Some of them are repeating. If the system is treating each as a different user, we're doubling the sentiment weight." Eli froze. "That's from the 2021 panic dataset," he said slowly. "The one tied to the credit scare." His fingers hovered over the keys. "We flagged issues with it back then, but we thought we'd cleaned it." Adrian came closer, his fatigue forgotten for the moment. He zoomed in on the data Nora had indicated. Duplicate IDs. Subtle, staggered, backs, but real. He exhaled, a sound somewhere between disbelief and relief. "You just found the gap our entire data team missed," he said quietly. Nora looked down, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I just saw something that didn't look right," she said. "Sometimes patterns feel off, even before you can explain why." "No," Adrian replied, his voice firm but gentle. "You stopped us from repeating the same mistake twice." They worked on, the hours slipping past unnoticed. Outside, the world of deadlines and judgments kept spinning. Inside that overlooked room, 3 tired people chased something more delicate than profit, the possibility that they could still build something honest out of the wreckage. And if you'd walked by in the hallway, you might have thought it was just an empty room with a flickering light. But inside, against all odds, a fallen company and 3 fragile hearts were learning how to keep going. Hours bled into nights, and nights into something quieter than morning. That pale space when even the city seemed to pause. In the forgotten room, the glow of monitors painted everyone in soft blues and grays. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Nora pushed her chair back and stood, shoulders stiff, eyes grainy with fatigue. "I'm going to splash some water on my face," she murmured. Adrian glanced over and noticed for the first time the empty cup at her elbow. Coffee-stained but untouched. He'd seen it sit there for over an hour while she kept working, pushing through exhaustion with the stubborn focus of someone who had never been allowed to quit just because she was tired. When she slipped into the hallway, he left the code running and headed to the small kitchenette down the corridor. The overhead lights there were harsh, buzzing faintly. Instead of reaching for the coffee pot like he usually did, his hand moved to a different shelf. A small box of chamomile tea bags sat pushed to the back, half forgotten. He boiled water, poured it into a mug, and watched steam curl upward like a slow breath. On a folded napkin, he wrote in pencil, "The strokes quick but careful. Eyes need rest like minds do. You're doing better than you know." Back in the conference room, he set the mug next to her workstation and left the napkin beside it, then returned quietly to his seat as if nothing had changed. When Nora came back, rubbing sleep from her eyes, she stopped. The warmth of the mug reached her fingers before she even picked it up. She read the note once, then again, the simple words landing deeper than he could have guessed. No one had ever written her encouragement at work before. She smiled, small, unguarded, genuine. Adrian didn't look up right away, but he felt the shift in the room, like a window had cracked open just enough to let in fresh air. From that night on, little things began to appear. Adrian started bringing 2 hoodies to their late sessions instead of 1. One hung on the back of Eli's chair. The other he laid quietly beside Nora's seat without comment. For a while she pretended not to notice, staying in her thin uniform until the air grew too cold to ignore. One long night, without fanfare, She slipped it over her head. Neither of them mentioned it. He never told her to rest. When her eyelids began to droop and her notes grew a fraction less tidy, he dimmed the overhead light instead of asking her to push harder. When the hours stretched and their stomachs hummed in protest, protein bars appeared on the table without explanation, their wrappers folded neatly and left in a corner when they were done. Nora, who had spent so much of her life moving silently around other people's exhaustion, wiping tables after meetings, emptying cans after long days she hadn't been part of, began to feel something she had rarely felt at work. Seen. Not as a curiosity, not as someone to feel sorry for, but as a person whose mind mattered. Adrian, who had once believed power came from big presentations and bold decisions, found his attention drawn to smaller things. The way she triple-checked her calculations even when no one was watching. The way she listened fully before offering a thought. The way Eli relaxed when she found a bug he'd missed and handled it without gloating. No romantic words passed between them. No confessions whispered in the hush of failing light. But something steady began to grow in the spaces between their sentences. Respect, first. Then trust. Then a quiet, shared resilience that didn't need to announce itself. They revised the model again and again, each iteration shaving off rough edges and closing gaps. Slowly, the dashboards began to change. Where there had been red warning flags and negative projections, cautious green markers appeared, not promises, but possibilities. Weeks slipped by like pages turning. One evening, as the first thin hint of spring touched the air outside, the final line of code compiled without error. No warnings. No failures. Eli leaned back with the low whistle. "That's it," he said. "She's breathing." Adrian stood in front of the monitor, hands in his pockets, saying nothing for a long moment. Then he turned to Nora, eyes clear in a way she hadn't seen before. "It's time," he said simply. She didn't know exactly what that meant yet, only that whatever came next, they wouldn't be facing it alone. The decision, once made, moved faster than the fear around it. Adrian chose not to bring the board into it, not yet. No press release, no crowded auditorium, no high-stakes spectacle. Just a quiet, private demonstration in a small conference room on the 7th floor, far from the main stage where his rise and fall had once been announced. Only a handful of people were invited. Investors he still trusted. Men and women who had known him before the magazine covers, before the extravagant valuations, back when his only claim to fame was that he showed up early and stayed late. Eli handled the integration, stitching their newly revived algorithm into real market feeds with the care of a watchmaker. Adrian rehearsed the story the numbers would tell, mapping out how to guide skeptical minds from doubt to understanding. And Nora, though she still wore the title of janitor on paper, found herself in charge of something she had never expected, translating their work into a story others could see. She sat in one of the empty briefing rooms at night, laptop open, fingers moving slowly but deliberately over the keys. She built slides that took the chaos of their model and turned it into clean, gentle shapes. Lines that rose and fell. Color blocks that told a simple truth about risk and possibility. She thought about the people who would be watching, about their tired eyes and cautious hearts, and tried to make every image easy to follow. Adrian reviewed the slides beside her. Sometimes he would pause, brows knitted, then nod, with a quiet, "That's good, leave it." Other times he'd offer a small adjustment, a label here, a clearer example there. More often than not, he ended up accepting her first instinct. The night before the demo, they stayed later than usual in the main presentation room. Nora tested the projector, unplugged and replugged cables, walked through the clicker sequence until her thumb knew the rhythm without looking. The rows of empty chairs seemed to watch her. From the side of the room, Adrian studied her in the half-light. He noticed the slight tremble in her hands when the projector flickered, the way she inhaled a little too sharply before pressing the next button. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her, and rested his hand lightly on the sleeve of her sweater. The touch was brief, steady, grounding. "You don't have to stand in front of them," he said quietly. "Just being here is enough to steady me." She looked up, surprised. The words, simple as they were, eased something tight inside her chest. For a moment, she just nodded, unable to trust her voice. As the time for the demo crept closer, Adrian reached into his jacket pocket. "There's one more thing," he said. He held out a pen, simple, metal, weightier than it looked, with the LumaVest emblem engraved along the barrel. "If this works," he said, "I want you to keep this, not as a trophy, just as a reminder of what you helped build when no one was watching." Nora took it gently, her fingers closing around the cool metal. "Thank you," she whispered. She slipped it into the notebook that had once held a crumpled memo rescued from a hallway floor. When the investors arrived, the room filled with a different kind of silence, measured, evaluating. They took their seats with arms crossed, expressions guarded. Some of them had sat across from Adrian before, offering praise and money. Now they had come to see whether there was anything left worth saving. Adrian stood at the front, posture straight, voice steady. He walked them through the system in careful steps, how the AI corrected for false signals, how it adjusted to real-time sentiment, how the new model, built in quiet collaboration, detected bias before it poisoned the data. Slide by slide, Nora watched from the back corner, her heart tapping in time with each click of the remote. At first, the investors' faces stayed hard, eyes narrowed. Then, little by little, she saw arms uncross, brows lift, questions sharpen from skeptical to curious. When the final slide appeared, showing where LumaVest would have stood 6 months earlier if this system had been in place, one of the investors exhaled a soft, disbelieving, "My God." A low murmur swept through the room. Adrian let the numbers speak for a while before he added quietly, "We're not letting go of this company. We're rebuilding it." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was real. And sometimes, when you've been walking through silence for too long, even a small sound of belief can feel like a storm. When the room finally emptied, Adrian stepped into the hallway, the door easing shut behind him. Nora was there, just beyond the threshold, her hand resting lightly against her chest as if to keep her heart from racing away. He walked up to her and held out a cold bottle of water. "We did it," he said. She took it, their fingers brushing. A shy, astonished smile touched her lips. For a breath, they stood closer than colleagues usually stand. No words, no grand declarations, just a brief embrace that happened almost without permission. His arms settled around her shoulders. Her forehead hovered near his collarbone. It lasted only a few seconds, but in that quiet, the shape of both their futures shifted. When they stepped apart, neither tried to explain it. They didn't have to. For the first time in a long while, they both understood. Tonight wasn't only about saving a company. It was about two people who had walked alone for far too long, finally realizing they weren't alone anymore. The days after the demo felt strangely lighter, as if someone had opened a window in a house that had been closed up too long. The halls of LumaVest were still cautious, still carrying the memory of crisis. But there was motion again. Conversations that had once been filled with rumors and exit plans shifted toward projects and roadmaps. The building was waking up. Adrian moved through it differently now. Not as the untouchable founder people whispered about, nor as the fallen figure the headlines had painted, but as someone walking the fine line between loss and possibility. One afternoon, he called Nora to his office. She stood in the doorway, still in her navy uniform, fingers smoothing the edge of her sleeve. The glass walls behind him reflected the city and her own surprised face in equal measure. "Come in," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She sat, feeling every inch of the distance between the world she knew, a cleaning cart, a supply closet, and this one, with its sleek furniture and quiet air. "I want to bring you on officially," Adrian said without preamble, "on our data team, full-time." The words landed like a shockwave. For a moment, she just stared at him. "Mr. Cole, I don't think I—" She shook her head faintly. "I'm not like them. I still look things up for basic functions. There are holes in what I know." He smiled, not the polished one he used for press photos, but something smaller, more human. "So do I," he said. "Look things up, I mean. The people who worry me are the ones who think they've stopped needing to learn." He saw the hesitation still in her eyes and softened his voice. "I won't push you," he added. "When you're ready, the door is open. Until then, we'll do this another way." Another way meant that, without changing her job title, he had Eli invite her into the quiet technical meetings the team held in cramped rooms with bad coffee and good ideas. When she walked in late to one of them, hovering awkwardly by the door, unsure if she belonged there, Adrian looked up, held her gaze, and pulled the chair beside him out without a word. She crossed the room as if it were a bridge, sat down, and opened her notebook. During a break, he slipped away and came back with a cup. Not coffee, she never finished those, but chamomile tea, steam curling gently upward. How did you know I don't like coffee? She asked, surprised. Because every time you tried to drink it, you made a face, he said. I notice things. She laughed, the sound low and a little disbelieving. She hadn't realized anyone had been watching that closely. Later that week, Lumavest held its first full staff meeting since the crisis. The auditorium filled slowly, seats taken by people who had seen colleagues laid off, projects frozen, futures questioned. Adrian stepped onto the small stage, the lights soft but steady. He didn't speak like a man reclaiming a throne. He spoke like someone who had walked through the same fire as everyone listening. He talked about failure first, about what he had done wrong, about trust lost and the work required to rebuild it. Then he paused, scanning the crowd. There is someone in this building, he said, whose name most of you don't know. But this person helped save the company. Not with a title or a corner office, but with clarity, discipline, and a refusal to throw away something that still had value. Murmurs rippled through the room. People glanced around, wondering who he meant. He didn't say, he simply added, We fell, in part, because we stopped listening. That will not happen again. At the very back, near the doors, Nora stood in her uniform, hands clenched loosely together. No one turned to look at her. No one pointed. She listened as the room applauded, a soft roar that seemed to come from far away. Her eyes stung, and she stepped into a side hallway when it became too much. Adrian found her there a few minutes later, leaning against the cool wall, breathing slowly. You okay? Papu sad isipai. He asked. She nodded, wiping at the corner of one eye with the back of her hand. I know you didn't say my name, she said with a shaky laugh. I know you didn't want me to, he replied. I wasn't trying to tell them, I was trying to tell you. Something in her chest tightened and then eased, like a knot coming undone. There was no big speech, no dramatic music. Just two people in a quiet hallway, sharing a moment that mattered more than either of them tried to show. A few days later, an envelope slid under the door of the small apartment Nora shared with a roommate. Her first thought was that it was another bill, another notice. Instead, the letterhead bore the Lumavest seal. Inside, she found 2 pages. The first was formal, a scholarship offer for a 1-year advanced certificate in data analytics at a respected program. Tuition. Books, a modest stipend to cover what her overnight paychecks usually handled. The second was handwritten in even, careful strokes. Nora, it began. You saved something I thought was beyond repair. I hope this helps you see what I see. Someone not only capable, but meant to build. You don't owe me anything. Just keep going. Her hands trembled. It was everything she had quietly wished for and everything that terrified her. The night before her first day, she slept in fragments. What if she didn't belong there? What if she failed? What if everyone else in the program had never scrubbed office floors or counted coins at the grocery store? Still in the morning, she packed her bag. At the edge of the parking lot, hugging her coat around her, she debated walking or taking the train. Before she decided, a dark car pulled up, the window lowered. Adrian leaned over from the driver's seat. You look like you're about to face down a dragon, he said. I was just going to walk, she replied. Not today, he said, stepping out to open the passenger door. Not on your first day. The drive was quiet in a gentle way, the kind that asks nothing of you. After a while, he said, I washed dishes on the night shift once. Small diner. I read business books between orders and smelled like fryer oil when I got home. He shrugged. I thought if I tried hard enough, maybe I'd get a chance to build something. Nora tucked that detail away carefully, like a small, warm stone in her pocket. My grandmother sewed hotel uniforms, she offered. She taught me how to repair seams so clothes would last longer than people expected. So that's why your notebooks are reinforced along the edges, he said. She laughed, caught, guilty. When they reached the campus, the morning light was just beginning to gild the tops of the brick buildings. As she reached for the door handle, he held out a thermos. Chamomile, he said, for when the first lecture feels like another language. Weeks turned into months. She wrestled with algorithms, scribbled through pages of code, muttered formulas to herself on the train. Some mornings, when the sky was particularly gray or her nerves particularly sharp, his car would be waiting at the curb. He never made a big deal of it. He was just there sometimes, like the kind of steady kindness people only admit they need when they look back later. On graduation day, the auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Nora sat in the front row, her hands twisting the edge of the gown's sleeve. When her name was called, last in the line, honors noted in the announcer's careful voice, she climbed the steps, accepted the certificate, and turned. She searched the crowd almost without meaning to. There near the back, not in a fancy seat or under a spotlight, stood Adrian. No camera, no entourage, just him, clapping with a quiet, unmistakable pride. Outside, under the shade of an old tree, he approached with a small bouquet of wildflowers, imperfect and beautiful. "You made it," he said simply. "I wasn't sure I could," she admitted. "I was," he replied. For a long breath, they just stood there. Then she reached out and took his hand. Not tightly, not dramatically, just long enough for the gesture to say what her voice couldn't quite carry yet. When she let go, she looked away, cheeks flushed. But the soft, enduring smile that touched his face said enough for both of them. Something rare had begun, and they both knew it, even if they still called it by practical names like work and study and second chances. 2 years later, LumaVest was no longer fighting to stay afloat. It was setting the current. The platform that had once existed only as a stray memo and a handful of penciled notes was now the spine of the company's new identity. The industry talked about its accuracy and its restraint, how it didn't just chase profit, but adjusted for human behavior in a way that felt strangely compassionate for a machine. Analysts praised its elegance. Competitors tried to copy what they couldn't quite see. Not many people knew that the heart of it all had been born in a janitor's notebook. Nora Hart now had a glass-walled office with a view of the river. Her job title read Director of Strategic Analytics, and a small, rotating team of younger analysts checked in with her each morning. Still, on most days, she arrived before the lights were fully on and left after the cleaning crews had finished. Old habits. Quiet suited her. On the day of LumaVest's biggest press event yet, the global launch of their next-generation platform, the building buzzed in a way it hadn't in years. Reporters checked their microphones. Cameras were tested and retested. Screens warmed up with looping logos and soft background music. Backstage, Nora adjusted the small microphone clipped to her collar. Her fingers fumbled once. Only once. She took a breath, steady but shallow. The curtain just ahead of her might as well have been the edge of a cliff. A familiar presence stepped into the narrow space behind her. Adrian. He reached for the mic wire, hands practiced now at this small ritual. "Here," he said quietly, fingers brushing her shoulder as he straightened the clip. "Just be yourself. That's more than enough." She looked up at him, and the pounding in her chest eased into something gentler. "Stay where I can see you," she murmured. "Always," he answered. They walked onto the stage together. The lights were bright, but not harsh. The crowd fell into an expectant hush. Adrian spoke first, as he usually did at such things. He outlined the company's journey, not skipping the fall that had nearly broken it. He talked about the technology in clear, grounded language, no fireworks, just facts. Then he paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "There's a part of our story you haven't heard," he said, "the part that saved us." The room quieted further. 2 years ago, he continued, on one of the worst nights of my career, I dropped a single page of notes in a hallway. I told the person who picked it up that it meant nothing, that it was trash. He turned slightly toward Nora. She didn't throw it away. She took it home. She studied it. She brought it back. Better than it had left my hands. That page became the seed of everything you've seen here today. Our models, our recovery, our future. A low murmur spread through the audience. Cameras shifted, focusing on Nora, who stood just a step behind him, still and composed, the old memory burning warm in her chest. "That page saved the company," Adrian said. His voice softened now, meant less for the microphones and more for her. "But she—" He met her eyes fully. "She saved something harder to repair." From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It was worn at the edges. The original ink faded, the pencil notes still faintly visible. "This one isn't a business memo," he said. "Not a contract. It's a promise, a long-term one." His words slowed, each one deliberate. "Would you take it? Would you—" The question hung there, clear and simple. The room seemed to hold its breath. Nora stared at him, at the familiar creases in the page, at the man who had once stood in an elevator believing nothing could be saved. She stepped forward. Her hand didn't shake this time. "Yes," she said. The word was steady, certain. Applause rose around them, but they hardly seemed to hear it. He placed the page in her hand, and with his other, he took hers. They didn't rush toward any grand gesture. There was no theatrical proposal, no dramatic dip of the lights. Just two people standing side by side, fingers laced, finally letting the whole world see what they had been building quietly for years. Later, when the cameras were put away and the crowd had drifted out into the evening, they slipped through a side exit. The city outside was washed in gold, the last light of day caught in the windows and river. They walked slowly, not in a hurry to reach the car. Adrian reached up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind Nora's ear, a gesture so familiar now it felt like breathing. "Ready?" he asked. She smiled, that small, luminous smile he'd come to recognize as the moment before she did something brave. "I've been ready since the night you told me to throw that paper away," she said softly. "And I didn't." He laughed under his breath, the sound warm, disbelieving, grateful. "Then let's see what we can build next." They moved forward together, into the gentle spill of twilight, carrying between them not just one fragile page, but the quiet knowledge that sometimes the biggest turns in a life begin in the smallest, sleepiest hours, when someone bends down to pick up what the world has dropped and decides not to let it go. If you're listening to this in the dark, with a tired heart and a mind that won't quite quiet down, maybe there is something in your life that isn't trash, even if you've been tempted to call it that. An idea, a habit, a part of yourself you keep folding away. Maybe it just needs another look, a softer light, a little more time. Stay with us for more stories of second chances, quiet courage, and late-night kindness that changes everything in slow, steady ways. And until the next tale finds you, may you rest knowing this: you are not as alone or as finished as you fear.